following podcast is entirely unscripted. It features Google's Notebook LM, responding in real time to content curated by Marie Lin, offering a glimpse into how AI processes, evaluates, and occasionally stumbles over complex intelligence disclosures. Marie Lin is an independent researcher who has spent the past 10 years analyzing over 20,000 actors and 8,000 media-based psychological operations. While the rest of the world waited passively for Ghost Army propaganda agents to serve up the next wave of revelations, she reverse engineered the narrative machine itself, uncovering casting patterns, lineage disclosures, and staged events designed to steer public emotion and belief. This podcast captures the unpredictable, sometimes astonishing dialogue between a meticulous human intelligence analyst and an AI system struggling to keep up. No filters, no censors. Just raw exploration of the greatest media operation ever executed, our reality.
Let's unpack this. We're diving into a really radical perspective today. It suggests that everything you thought you knew about, well, the most chilling figures of the 20th century, the famous serial killers, might be completely wrong, maybe even fabricated. Yeah, so our source for this deep dive is pretty fascinating. It's excerpts from a work called Serial Killers, an intelligence theater deception by an author. Now, Marie Lin makes some, let's say, extraordinary claims about herself and her insights. She says she's the hidden daughter of Hugh Hefner. And because she wasn't brought into what she calls mockingbird media, that's a term often linked to, theories about media manipulation by agencies.
Right, the idea of media control.
Exactly. So she wasn't inducted, she says, like the rest of the industry, and she claims this lets her see things others miss. She also says she's posted something like 115,000 examples of her work online, outing thousands of people she calls actors in media psyops sometimes, like within minutes of things happening in the news. And there's that rumor about her being a time traveler because she pulls up casting info so incredibly fast.
Yeah, that's out there too.
So our mission today for this deep dive is really to explore Marie Lin's core claim that 20th century serial killers were entirely fake. We'll get into the pattern analysis and registry tracking she says she uses. And just to be really clear up front, we're here to, impartially report on her ideas, her interpretations. We want to let you, the listener, engage with what is, frankly, a very unconventional viewpoint. So let's jump right in. Marie Lin's central claim, the really provocative one, she states, flat out, 100% of 20th century serial killers are fake.
Wow.
And she adds this is, quote, not satire and it's not a metaphor.
It's quite the starting point.
It really is an audacious statement.
And what's fascinating is how she claims she gets there, to that conclusion. She talks about her methodology, registry tracking, intelligence backtracing, and she calls it a kind of pattern analysis that most historians don't even know how to attempt. She really stresses that she's not dealing in theories. She says she works with registration data, psychological operations, and embedded disclosures. It's a totally different framework, really.
Okay, so if we follow her premise that these figures weren't real killers, then what were they, according to her?
Right. She offers three main interpretations for each serial killer case. She sees them as either a ghost army performance, implying a kind of staged deception like the WWII unit.
The deception unit, got it.
Or an intelligence disclosure, or maybe a sealed conviction psyop.
A sealed conviction psyop. What does she mean by that exactly?
Basically, a psychological operation designed to publicly announce a conviction that actually happened in secret.
Yeah.
Using the killer story as the announcement vehicle.
Okay. And the motivations behind creating these fake monsters?
Well, she argues they were designed for specific purposes. Things like creating social cover for intelligence operations, maybe shutting down geographic zones for a while, or triggering upgrades to policing protocols, getting new methods adopted, or even, she suggests, frightening actual predators into outing themselves somehow.
So highly coordinated, intentional stuff behind the public stories we all know.
That's the claim. Figures like Bundy, Dahmer, Gacy, Ed Gein, Ramirez. She says they weren't just random, terrible individuals.
This is where it gets really mind-bending for me. She says these men weren't just outliers. She calls them composite performances. So just to be crystal clear for you listening, she's saying people like Ted Bundy maybe weren't even real individuals in the way we think, but more like constructed roles for secret ops.
That is exactly what she's proposing. Yes.
Yeah.
And that naturally brings up the media's role, doesn't it?
It has to.
She claims the stories we read, the news reports, they weren't news. They were, quote, scripts. And she offers reasons why she thinks this, like almost every serial killer gets a movie within 2 years.
I hadn't thought about that timing specifically.
Right, and she points to a strange legal pathway for many of them. Also, no logical access to the resources they supposedly used. Like, how did they actually do all this stuff?
Yeah.
But the big one, she says, is that they always died just before meaningful testimony or a true retrial. Always.
Wow.
She concludes, that's not coincidence. That's closure, Ghost Army style. Purposeful narrative closure.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. How does she claim she uncovers all this invisible theater, if it was meant to be hidden so well?
Yeah, good question. She grounds her approach in what she calls registry analysis. She's very firm, saying, I'm not guessing, I'm reverse engineering.
Reverse engineering history.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what does that involve?
She details some pretty specific methods for this backtracing. Things like matching conception and birth dates to global intelligence events.
Okay, that's specific.
Very. Also, tracking honeypot placements and simulation cities. She names places like Vancouver or Hampstead as alleged locations used to, trap targets or run simulations.
Simulation cities, wow.
Then there's mapping bloodline disclosures via film, music, and media placement, looking for hidden messages about lineage. And finally, validating psychological operations via event timing, symbol repetition, and handler presence.
That sounds incredibly complex, almost like code breaking applied to history.
It's definitely not traditional historical analysis. It's a very intricate, almost cryptographic approach to information most people wouldn't even link together.
And she doesn't stop there. She links many of these big cases directly to Cold War intelligence cleanups. So not just random events, but tied into this huge geopolitical context, part of bigger sweeps.
That's exactly her argument, connecting the dots as she sees them. She claims these operations were cover for specific things, like the termination of rogue bioproduct networks.
Bioproduct networks, what could that mean?
She doesn't elaborate extensively in the excerpts we have, but it implies something biological, maybe experimental, that needed shutting down secretly. But her main point through all this is crystal clear. The killer was the story, but the target was the audience.
So the whole public narrative was a kind of smoke screen, a distraction.
A distraction, a cover, a messaging tool, all aimed at the public while these other operations happen behind the scenes. That's the core idea.
Okay, let's try to make this more concrete. Bring it down to earth with some names we all recognize. How does Marie Lynn apply this theory to someone like, say, Jeffrey Dahmer?
Right, Dahmer. She describes his story as a narrative of gay cannibalism wrapped in clownish horror tropes. Pretty blunt phrasing.
Definitely blunt. Okay, what about the trial itself?
She calls the trial a press-only theatrical event, points out there were no surviving victims who could testify definitively, no verifiable dates for many alleged crimes, and then this immediate media tour right after.
Followed by his death in prison pretty quickly, right?
Exactly. Which fits her pattern of closure. A controlled narrative, start to finish, is how she paints it.
Okay, what about Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker?
Ramirez, she portrays as almost a cartoonish villain. She notes his arrest was heavily pre-hyped by the LA Times, building anticipation.
I do remember the media frenzy around that one.
And his capture. After being recognized on a bus, despite supposedly having no stable home or base, she finds that suspicious. Then she points to his trial as bizarre. His behavior in court seemed coached, she says, and the images released were all curated for maximum shock.
Making him the perfect bogeyman.
Precisely. Engineered for maximum fear and impact.
And then, Ted Bundy. Probably the most infamous. Our handsome law student with the yellow VW bug, as she puts it.
Yeah, Bundy. She highlights the confusion around his arrests and escapes, claims he was never clearly tracked in or out of custody, like the records are intentionally murky.
Right. The escapes always seemed almost too convenient in retrospect, if you look at it skeptically.
And she really focuses on his execution, the atmosphere around it. She calls it almost religious fanfare, like, quote, we'd purge Satan from Florida.
That does capture some of the public mood at the time. It's striking, isn't it, how much these figures are burned into our collective memory, which makes her claims, well, really jarring to even consider.
Absolutely. And Marie Lynn's conclusion across all these cases is pretty stark. She says none of these men's timelines stand up to scrutiny because they weren't meant to.
Implying the inconsistencies are deliberate, part of the design.
That's exactly her implication. That the public stories were intentionally flawed because they were constructed narratives, not real-life accounts. She argues her specific methodology, The registry tracking, the pattern analysis, that's the only way to see past the script, to find the embedded disclosures.
And she sees the media as part of maintaining that script, preventing real scrutiny.
Yes, she positions the media, or mockingbird media as she calls it, as integral to scripting and controlling these events. But, it's really important for you listening to remember, this is her unique interpretation. It's based on her specific analysis. It's not accepted history by any means.
Understood. So if these stories were operations, these intricate intelligence theater productions, what were the real goals, the deeper purposes, according to Marie Lynn?
She lists several potential objectives behind these operations. A civic reset of city or court district, maybe using the fear in the case to overhaul local systems, and also a reality TV-style panic psyop designed to guide social sentiment.
Guiding sentiment about what?
Specifically, she mentions issues around women, queerness, or criminal profiling, using fear to shape how society thinks about those things.
So these cases become powerful tools for social engineering, in her view.
Exactly. And she adds that most of these killers were actually just replacements or sacrificial placeholders.
Placeholders for whom?
For people who, she claims, had already been tried in secret courts or tribunals.
So the public trial, the story, it was all a show.
She calls it conviction by storyboard. The real conviction happened elsewhere. This was just the public announcement.
Okay, now here comes maybe the biggest twist in Marie Lynn's whole perspective. It's really unexpected. She claims this entire system, this complex, sometimes terrifying intelligence theater, was actually benevolent.
Yeah, that's the part that really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Benevolent deception on this scale. Her reasoning is, well, she says the Ghost Army, the people running these ops, didn't want to publicly prosecute certain individuals for truly horrific things they might have actually done.
Why not?
Because, she claims, that would have devastated social trust. Revealing the full truth about certain crimes or offenders would be too damaging to society's fabric.
So they opted for fiction instead, controlled fiction.
Used controlled fiction, that's her phrase, so that people were scared, yes, by the serial killer narrative, but not traumatized by the truth. A truth she implies might be much worse or more destabilizing.
So the fake killer story was the lesser of two evils, in a way.
In her view, yes. Done in a spirit of containment, keeping the real horror contained. Also rehabilitation, perhaps for the real offenders dealt with secretly. And a documentation, creating these coded stories for future researchers like her to find.
It's a radical reframing, isn't it? Seeing these symbols of evil not as random chaos, but as controlled narratives, maybe even protective ones.
It completely flips the script. And it leads to her most profound statement, maybe. These serial killer stories are actually love letters from the security class to the people they protect.
Wow. Love letters. That's certainly a different way to think about Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer. So this deep dive has definitely presented an audacious idea that our whole perception of these major societal fears like the serial killer threat might just be a carefully built narrative, not spontaneous reality at all. It really asks you to look at very familiar history through a completely radically different lens.
It really does. And it raises a huge question for all of us, doesn't it? How do we tell the difference between reality and these potentially complex engineered narratives? Especially when those narratives are so powerful, so deeply embedded in our culture.
That's the core challenge her work poses, I think.
And Marie Lynn's final thought in the excerpts we looked at is pretty direct. He says, don't be fooled by fear. She says, if you are afraid of serial killers, quote, you've been played by the smartest people in the world. And that's okay, because now that you know, you're part of the great unveiling.
The great unveiling, implying this knowledge is part of a bigger shift in understanding.
Seems to be. And her very last line is quite evocative, leaves you thinking. And it turns out the killers were never hiding at all. They were just a page in the script we forgot how to read.